Detective Conan, The Adventures of Super Bowl II, A Detective Tales. The room was alive with the kind of electric hum that only an unyielding press corps can produce. Flashbulbs popped, questions ricocheted off the walls, and Detective Arthur Conan stood at the podium, a living legend poised to deliver another virtuoso performance. Behind him, the seal of the Miami-Dade County Police glinted in the harsh light. He adjusted the microphone, an unnecessary gesture but one calculated to hold their attention just a moment longer, and then leaned in. "It was, ladies and gentlemen, a case of the simplest deduction," Conan began, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "While my esteemed colleagues pursued blind alleys, the evidence, when viewed from the proper angle, told a very different story." The reporters murmured, pens scratching against notepads. Conan resisted the urge to grin too broadly. They loved this, the spectacle, the theatre of it all. He might have been just another detective, but right now he was a star. A hand shot up in the front row, and a reporter from the Herald asked the question on everyone's mind. "Detective Conan, how were you able to pinpoint the suspect so quickly? The community had been living in fear for weeks." Conan allowed himself a small, indulgent smile. "The community need never have feared, my friend. It was all a matter of recognizing the simplest truth, that our so-called monster was never truly hiding at all." The room erupted into a frenzy of scribbling and camera flashes. He could see it now, the next day's headline, "Conan cracks the case," in bold letters above his photograph. But not everyone was caught up in the excitement. At the back of the room, just beyond the glow of the flashbulbs, a figure lingered in shadow. Arms crossed, face impassive, the observer's eyes never left Conan. The detective felt the gaze like a prickling at the nape of his neck, though he gave no sign. It was only a momentary distraction before another question came from the throng. Conan fielded it deftly, weaving a tapestry of half-revealed deductions and carefully placed vagaries. He was in his element, the centre of the story, the man who saved the day. But as the press conference continued, that shadowy figure remained, silent, unmoving. And though Arthur Conan would have dismissed it then as nothing more than another nameless bureaucrat or officer in the crowd, there was a certainty growing in that gaze, a certainty that this grand victory, this moment of triumph, might not be all it seemed. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken with every passing second, the oppressive heat of Miami's winter doing nothing to ease the growing tension. Detective Arthur Conan sat at the prosecution's table, his signature smirk absent. His gaze was fixed on the evidence table, though now he realized it wasn't evidence at all. "Your Honor," the defense lawyer said, his voice steady as he held up a photograph, "this is the original document, signed and dated weeks before the crime was committed. The evidence presented by Detective Conan was altered." A ripple went through the audience. Reporters hunched forward, pens poised. The accused, Harold Styles, a frail man of 42, sagged visibly, tears glistening in his eyes. "Order!" the judge barked, his gavel a sharp punctuation to the murmur of shock. "Mr. Styles, you are hereby released. This case is dismissed." The gavel slammed down once more, and for a moment no one moved. Then the whispers erupted into a roar. Styles buried his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling. Conan didn't look at him. He couldn't. Outside the courthouse, the world was as blindingly bright as it was unrelenting. Reporters swarmed like seagulls over a tossed sandwich, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Detective Conan," shouted one journalist, "how do you respond to the allegation?" "Have anything to say to Mr. Styles?" demanded another. Arthur Conan kept walking, his broad shoulders tense under his navy blazer. The smirk was gone, so was the swagger. He didn't meet their eyes, didn't slow his pace. The questions followed him down the steps, but he never answered. At the bottom his boss was waiting. Chief Holland, a man with years etched into every line of his face, crossed his arms and tilted his head toward the crowd. "This is a mess, Conan," he said, his voice low but firm. "A damn mess." "I'll sort it out," Conan muttered, though the words felt hollow. Holland didn't let up. "You've put the department's reputation on the line. Mine, too. Maybe it's time you considered stepping back." Conan stopped, finally looking at him. The chief met his gaze, and for the first time Conan saw not anger, but pity. That, more than anything, left him speechless. Back at his apartment, Conan tossed his badge onto the small coffee table. It landed next to his service revolver, both items catching the soft orange glow of the setting sun. He stood there for a moment, his hands resting on the back of his worn armchair. The room was still, save for the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of a neighbour's radio playing a crackly jazz tune. Conan's hands began to shake. Just a tremor at first, then more pronounced. He clenched them into fists. The phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the heavy silence. He glanced at it, hesitating. After a moment, it fell silent. Conan lowered himself into the chair and stared at the badge. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. A brass fan spun lazily overhead, its rhythmic squeak mingling with the low murmur of conversation and the faint notes of a Sinatra tune drifting from the jukebox. The bar had seen better days. Its cracked leather stools and sticky counters testified to a clientele who cared more for the liquor than the ambience. In a corner booth, Detective Arthur Conan sat alone, his profile etched in shadows. A cigarette smouldered in the ashtray before him, a near-empty glass of bourbon beside it. The once bright spark in his blue eyes had dimmed, replaced by the heavy sheen of self-imposed exile. Outside, Miami's streets buzzed with life. Fans decked in green and gold for the Packers and black and silver for the Raiders crowded the sidewalks, shouting predictions and downing drinks in pre-game revelry. The city throbbed with anticipation for tomorrow's Super Bowl. But here, inside this worn tavern on the fringes of the city, Conan was oblivious to the noise. He leaned back against the cracked leather, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular, until a shadow fell across his table. "Tariko, Conan!" The voice was young, firm, and carried a note of reverence. Conan looked up slowly, his expression blank as he took in the newcomer. The man standing before him was clean-shaven, with short-cropped black hair and the crisp look of a uniform fresh off the press. "Who's asking?" Conan replied, his voice rough from the bourbon. "Bill Townsend," the young man said. He extended a hand that Conan did not shake. Undeterred, Townsend pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "I'm with the department. At least I will be for a few months until I'm called to active duty. They say you're the best detective Miami's ever had." Conan chuckled dryly. "They say a lot of things, kid." He stubbed out his cigarette and reached for his glass, finding it empty. "I need your help," Townsend pressed on, leaning forward. "The murder case. Last night at the Mayfair Hotel. The sports journalist was found dead in his room. The department stretched thin with security for the game, and I've read about your work. I know you can crack this." Conan's expression remained unmoved, but his hand froze mid-reach. He turned his gaze toward Townsend, studying him carefully. The rookie had that eager look Conan had once seen in his own reflection, long before the courtroom humiliation, before the headlines turned sour. "Why me?" Conan asked after a pause. "The department's got plenty of good men still on the payroll." "They've got men, sure," Townsend said, "but good. Not like you." For a moment Conan considered brushing him off. The last thing he needed was to get dragged into another mess. But there was something in the kid's eyes, something earnest, almost desperate. He glanced at the ceiling fan, the faint buzz of the city seeping in from the closed door. The city he once owned. The city that now barely noticed him. The thought of it, of stepping back into the fray, of proving that he still had what it took, gnawed at him. He looked back at Townsend, finally giving a small nod. "Fine. Tell me what you've got." And just like that, the first spark of life returned to Conan's eyes. Arthur Conan waved a hand dismissively, leaning back against the booth's cracked leather. "Look, Townsend, was it? I'm not in the business anymore. Whatever happened at that hotel, I'm sure your people can handle it." Townsend's expression didn't falter. He leaned in, his voice low enough to be lost in the background hum of the bar. "You're not hearing me, sir. This isn't just any murder. The victim was about to publish a story on game fixing. Something big, involving one of the Super Bowl teams." Conan froze, his hand still on the edge of the glass he'd been thinking about refilling. "Game fixing?" he repeated, his tone sharper now. "You're saying someone killed a sports reporter to keep him quiet?" "That's what it looks like," Townsend said. "The department doesn't have the manpower to handle this right now, not with the Super Bowl tomorrow and all the extra security. If you don't step in, it might get swept under the rug." Conan's lips pressed into a thin line. His gaze drifted toward the window, where neon lights cast faint, shifting patterns across the floor. The roar of distant crowds filtered in faintly, a reminder of the event that had consumed the city. He turned his attention back to the young detective. Townsend wasn't like the press, or the higher-ups, who had turned their backs on Conan after his fall. The kid wasn't trying to exploit him. He was desperate, sure, but not manipulative, and Conan could see the determination behind his steady gaze. "Even if I wanted to help," Conan said after a long pause, "why should I trust you? You're just a rookie. What makes you think you can handle a case this big?" Townsend straightened, his jaw tightening. "Because I know you're the only one who can get to the truth, and I'm willing to learn from the best." Conan stared at him for another moment, then exhaled heavily. He hadn't expected a compliment, much less a direct appeal to his skill. He thought of the headlines that once lauded him as a legend, the accolades that had long since turned to silence. This could be a chance, a real chance, to prove himself again, not to others, but to the man he'd been before everything fell apart. "Fine," he said finally. "But I'm not making any promises. I'll take a look at what you've got. If it's nonsense, I'm walking away." Townsend nodded eagerly. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste your time." As Townsend began to lay out the details, Conan couldn't help the faint tug of intrigue stirring in his chest. For the first time in years, the fog of disappointment lifted just a fraction, revealing a glimmer of the sharp, confident detective he'd once been. The Mayfair Hotel had once been a jewel in Miami's glittering crown, its Art Deco facade still clinging to the faded glamour of a bygone era. Now, under a bright January sun that seemed incongruous with the night's dark events, the building loomed more like a monument to a tarnished past. Arthur Conan adjusted his coat against the sharp breeze, though the weather had little to do with the chill that ran through him. The corridors within were quieter than he expected, muffling the noise of the city's excited pre-Super Bowl crowds. The room in question was on the 4th floor. A uniformed officer nodded silently at Conan and Townsend as they approached, lifting the cordon to let them in. Townsend hesitated briefly, a flicker of unease crossing his young face, before stepping inside. Conan paused at the threshold, taking a slow breath. The air was heavy with the smell of stale cigars, lingering sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood. As his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, the details began to assert themselves. The typewriter sat on the small desk near the window. The sheet in its roller rolled halfway down, unfinished. A headline typed in bold letters read, "Game of Shadows. What the NFL doesn't want you to know." The journalist, Sam Gallagher, lay crumpled beside the bed. His shirt was torn at the collar, a red stain blooming like a dark flower across his chest. The overturned chair near the desk, the disarray of the papers scattered across the floor, these told of a struggle, but not an extended one. Conan bent down near the window, narrowing his eyes at a faint scuff mark on the sill. "What do you see?" Townsend asked, his voice low. "A detail," Conan murmured, "or perhaps nothing, but it pays to notice." He gestured toward the window. "That's not where the chair was, not at first. It was near the desk when the fight began. Someone moved it, or tripped over it, on their way out. There's a rhythm to these things." Townsend frowned, scribbling in his notepad. "The window. Do you think someone climbed out?" "Unlikely." Conan tapped the edge of the sill. "There's no secondary scuffing to suggest that kind of movement. Whoever left here walked out the door, not into the night." As Townsend nodded, a soft knock came at the open door. A housekeeper stood there, clutching a set of keys. She was an older woman, her uniform starched and neat, though her hands betrayed a slight tremble. Conan straightened, his gaze pinning her gently but firmly. "You were working last night?" "Yes, sir," she said, her accent faintly Caribbean. "I do the evening shift. Came by this room to turn down the bed, but Mr. Gallagher wasn't here then. She hesitated, glancing at Townsend before continuing. When I came back later, I saw someone leaving, a man." "Can you describe him?" Conan asked. She nodded slowly. "He was tall, broad, wore a Green Bay Packers jacket, looked like he was in a hurry. I didn't see his face, but I think he was carrying something. A bag, maybe?" Conan gave a faint nod, filing away her words. "And you didn't tell the other officers?" "I wasn't sure if it mattered," she stammered. "I didn't think—" "Everything matters," Conan said, not unkindly. "Thank you, that will be all for now." As the housekeeper withdrew, Townsend turned to him. "A Packers jacket, that's a pretty clear lead." Conan's eyes flicked back to the room, the typewriter, the scattered papers, the chair, the faint scuff on the window ledge. "Is it?" he said, almost to himself. "Or is it just what we're meant to see?" He didn't answer his own question, but his expression hardened. He stepped closer to the desk, examining the half-written article. The scent of cigars clung to the air, mingling with the faint saltiness of the sea breeze that filtered through the cracked window. Miami in 1968 was never simple. Neither, it seemed, was this case. The Packers' locker room was an impressive yet stifling domain. Gleaming brass nameplates and neatly hung uniforms spoke to the team's disciplined image. The air carried a faint blend of sweat, leather polish, and liniment, a sharp contrast to the bright Florida sunlight just beyond the heavy steel doors. Players milled about in various stages of post-practice routine, lacing shoes, slinging towels over their shoulders, murmuring in tight knots of conversation. Arthur Conan stepped into the room, his trench coat at odds with the athletic gear surrounding him. Townsend followed closely, his presence more official but no more welcome. The noise dulled as heads turned to regard the visitors. Conversations dropped, leaving only the rustle of jerseys and the occasional clink of a locker door. The coach, a hulking man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a whistle dangling around his neck, strode toward them. His voice carried the authority of someone who rarely heard the word no. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone implied he was already displeased by their presence. "We're following up on some information," Conan said, his voice calm but firm. "About the journalist who died last night." The coach's face darkened. "And what's that got to do with my players?" "It may have everything or nothing to do with them," Conan replied smoothly. "That's what we're here to find out." "Not without a warrant, you're not," the coach growled. His arms crossed, and the sheer breadth of his frame seemed to signal the end of the discussion. Conan gave a faint smile, as if the coach's resistance had been expected. "Just a few questions. Off the record, we're not here to cause trouble." The players exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a burly lineman with tape around his knuckles, let out a low chuckle. "You think any of us would have killed that guy? What'd he write a bad article about our defence?" Laughter rippled through the room, but it was forced, and Conan caught the subtle shift in posture from one player near the back. A second-string wide receiver, younger and slighter than the others, stood awkwardly by his locker, adjusting his gear with unnecessary precision. His eyes flicked toward the team manager, who stood silently near the coach, arms folded. Conan took note. "We'll just take a minute of your time," he said, stepping past the coach with Townsend in tow. "No harm in talking, is there?" His question hung unanswered in the air as he manoeuvred toward the nervous young player. The locker room buzzed again, players quickly resuming their tasks. Conan approached the receiver casually, as though merely taking a closer look at the nameplate above his locker. When he spoke, it was low and quiet enough that only the young man could hear. "Interesting day, isn't it?" Conan said. The receiver stiffened, not meeting his gaze. "You look like you've got something on your mind. Maybe something you saw last night? Something you might want to share?" The player's hands froze mid-magmate, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. He shook his head quickly. "I don't know anything." Conan tilted his head, his expression one of polite curiosity. "You seemed nervous when I mentioned the journalist's death, and you keep glancing at that gentleman over there." He nodded toward the manager, who had taken to flipping through a clipboard, though his gaze strayed toward them more often than not. "Is there a reason for that?" The receiver swallowed hard, finally meeting Conan's eyes. I wasn't even at the hotel. I heard about it this morning, like everyone else. Conan took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Son, I don't think you killed him. But I think you know something, maybe just a small detail that could help us find out who did. If you don't want to talk now, that's fine. But keep this in mind. The truth will come out one way or another. And if you happen to be the one who brought it to light, well, that can go a long way in your favor. The player hesitated, his fingers twitching against the edge of his locker, his lips parted as if to speak, but a sudden bark from the coach, "Let's wrap it up, gentlemen," snapped the moment. The receiver's jaw clenched shut, and he quickly turned back to his gear, a silent refusal hanging in the air. Conan straightened, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he walked back toward Townsend, who was waiting by the exit. They stepped into the hallway, leaving the locker room's closed ranks behind. "You think he knows something?" Townsend asked. "Without a doubt," Conan replied. His lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "The question is whether he's too afraid or too smart to tell us what it is." Conan caught the young player alone near the back exit, where the noise from the main locker room had faded to a low hum. The fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly, casting a pale, artificial glow on the wide-eyed man shifting nervously from one foot to the other. His name, Conan had gathered, was Pete Stafford, a rookie who hadn't seen much game time, but had a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You seem like an honest kid, Pete," Conan began, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You know something about last night. Let's hear it." Pete shook his head quickly. "I don't know anything. I wasn't even at the—" Conan raised an eyebrow. "You've got a lousy poker face. Let's skip the denials and get to the part where you tell me what you saw." The rookie hesitated, glancing toward the door as though contemplating a quick escape, but Conan didn't move. He simply stood there, his hands resting in the pockets of his trench coat, waiting. After a long moment, Pete sighed. "Fine. I saw someone. I didn't get a good look, but someone left the room just after midnight." "And?" Conan prompted. "And I heard something," Pete continued reluctantly. "I wasn't supposed to be in that hallway. I had a meeting, about my contract, with one of the managers, and when I was leaving I heard voices near the room, Mr. Gallagher's room." "What did they say?" "Heh." Pete hesitated again, rubbing the back of his neck. "Something about keeping the score clean. I don't know what it meant, but it didn't sound good. And then I saw this guy walk out. Big guy, wearing a coat that could have been Packers colours, but I couldn't see his face. He moved fast, and I wasn't about to stick around." Conan tilted his head slightly. "Why not report this earlier?" "You think I want to get involved in this mess?" Pete snapped, his voice rising before he caught himself. He glanced nervously at the door again. "I've got my career to think about. If I start pointing fingers, it's over for me." "It might be over for you anyway if you keep quiet," Conan said bluntly. "Whoever did this isn't going to stop with one body if they think it'll keep their secret safe. You saw something. That makes you a loose end." Pete's face turned pale, and Conan seized the moment. "I can protect you," he said, his voice steady. "Tell me what you know, and I'll make sure you're safe." Pete hesitated once more, then nodded. "All right, but if anyone finds out—" "They won't," Conan assured him. The next day, Pete Stafford was gone. His locker was empty, and the staff said he'd checked out of the team's hotel early that morning. The manager claimed Pete had requested a transfer to another franchise, a sudden career move, but not unheard of. Conan stood in the now silent hallway, his expression unreadable. The promise of protection hadn't been enough. The kid had panicked, run off, and taken with him the best lead Conan had so far. "You think he skipped town?" Townsend asked, leaning against the wall beside Conan. "Maybe," Conan said quietly. "Or maybe someone helped him disappear." He turned and started down the hall, his steps echoing faintly on the tiled floor. "We'll find him again, or more likely he'll resurface when he realizes he's in more danger on his own." But as Conan stepped outside into the bright Miami sunlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that Pete's silence wasn't just fear. It was survival, and whoever was pulling the strings knew exactly how to make people vanish. The bar was a world apart from the gleaming hotels and pristine beaches of Miami. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, the low murmur of conversation blending with the clink of glasses and the soft hum of a jukebox playing something mournful. Conan pushed open the door and stepped inside. The light was low enough that faces were mere suggestions, but the glint of polished shoes under tables and the occasional flash of a gold watch suggested that the patrons here weren't just run-of-the-mill drunks. They were connected, the kind of people who operated behind the scenes, just as he'd expected. At a round table near the back, Dominic Falcone sat in his chair like a king on his throne. He was older now, his thick salt-and-pepper hair slicked back, his suit impeccable despite the shabby surroundings. Falcone leaned back casually, a whiskey glass in one hand, his other hand slowly turning a silver coin over and over between his fingers. His eyes flicked up when Conan entered, then narrowed as recognition settled in. "Well, well," Falcone said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "If it isn't Miami's most disgraced detective. What can I do for you, Conan? Surely you're not here for a social call?" Conan stepped closer, his footsteps deliberate and slow. He kept his coat buttoned, his hands in his pockets, and his expression unreadable. Around the room several men shifted subtly in their seats, eyes watching his every move. "I've got a question, Falcone," Conan said evenly. "How does a sports reporter wind up dead in his hotel room the same night he's planning to expose a little score-keeping irregularity?" Falcone's brow twitched, but his smile remained intact. "Score-keeping irregularity? That sounds like league business, not mine." Conan didn't smile. "Let's cut the act. You've got money on this game, big money, and you've got the influence to make sure things go the way you want them to, or you did until Gallagher decided to write that article." Falcone let out a low chuckle. "You know, Conan, I always admired your nerve. Even after they threw you out, you still carry yourself like you're untouchable. But that doesn't mean you should walk into my place throwing around accusations." He turned the coin over again, the soft, metallic sound almost rhythmic. The men at the surrounding tables sat still, but their eyes were hard, their postures alert. Conan took another step forward, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here for a fight, Falcone. I'm here to tell you that I know what you're doing, I know how you're doing it, and I know why Gallagher was killed." Falcone's smile thinned. He set the coin down on the table and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood. "That's a dangerous claim, Conan. Dangerous for you. You should walk away while you can." "Maybe," Conan said with a faint shrug. "But I've got something you don't. Evidence." For the first time, the room seemed to hold its breath. The men watching from the shadows shifted in their seats, waiting for a cue from Falcone. Falcone's smile faded entirely, replaced by something colder. He studied Conan for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair and waved a hand. His men relaxed, and the tension in the room eased by a fraction. "Evidence," Falcone repeated, his tone lighter now, though the edge remained. "All right, detective, let's see if you're as clever as you think. If you've got something, show it. Otherwise, get out of my bar." Conan met his gaze steadily. "You'll see it when the time is right." He turned without another word and walked out, the eyes of Falcone's men trailing him as he went. The door closed behind him, the smoky haze and murmured voices swallowing him up. Back on the street, Conan lit a cigarette, his face giving nothing away. He wasn't sure if Falcone believed him, but he knew one thing: the man would think twice before making another move. Arthur Conan stepped into his motel room and paused. The door closed behind him with a faint click, but his eyes were already on the envelope, resting squarely in the middle of the bed. The room itself was dim and quiet, a single lamp casting a yellowish glow over the chipped furniture and faded curtains. The envelope stood out, its stark white crisp against the threadbare coverlet. Conan moved toward it slowly, his footsteps muffled on the thin carpet. He recognized the weight of such a gesture. People didn't leave envelopes on beds unless they wanted something, and in his line of work, what they wanted often came at a steep price. He picked it up. The paper was smooth, expensive. This wasn't a note scrawled on motel stationery. Sliding the flap open, he found a check inside, neatly folded. The figure stopped him mid-motion. $10,000. He set the check aside and unfolded the note beneath it. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, almost impersonal. Consider it a fresh start. Keep your mouth shut. For a moment Conan said nothing. The note, the check, the words, it all sat there before him like a trap laid too carefully. Yet he didn't feel alarmed. What he felt was something else, something far more insidious. He felt tempted. He sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope still in one hand, the check in the other. The numbers on that slip of paper seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. $10,000. Not a fortune by any means, but enough. Enough to settle debts, enough to leave Miami, maybe head somewhere else, enough to start over. Conan set the check down and rubbed his temple, his thoughts circling back to the same place they always went in quiet moments like these. He could still hear the gavel slamming down in that courtroom years ago, still see the flashbulbs popping as he left through the courthouse steps. Head bowed. The headlines had been merciless. Detective Conan, a star falls. They wrote his obituary long before he was done. No amount of brilliance could erase the humiliation that followed, the closed doors, the cancelled contracts, the cold shoulders from old allies. And now here was this check, sitting on the bed, promising to make all that go away, or at least make it easier to forget. For a moment he imagined cashing it, walking out, never looking back, living a quiet life far away from the city that had turned its back on him. His hand hovered over the check. But it was only a moment. The temptation had come and gone, leaving behind a residue of self-loathing. Conan picked up the note again, staring at the clean handwriting, the faintly condescending tone of the message. He could feel the calculation behind those words, the assumption that he would take the money, that he would disappear like a shadow under the harsh Miami sun. He crumpled the note slowly, deliberately, before tossing it onto the bedside table. The check followed, landing on top. The envelope went last. Conan leaned back against the headboard, closing his eyes. $10,000 wouldn't fix what had happened. It wouldn't erase the mistakes he'd made, and it sure as hell wouldn't silence the part of him that still cared about the truth. The knock at the door came just as Conan let out a long sigh. He glanced up, the crumpled note still in his hand, and hesitated. It came again, more insistent this time. "Just a moment," Conan called out, his voice heavy with irritation. He smoothed the note out, his fingers lingering on the words, and then tossed it onto the bedside table alongside the check. When he opened the door, Townsend stood there, his face a mixture of disappointment and barely contained anger. He didn't wait for an invitation to step inside. "What is this?" Townsend demanded, gesturing sharply toward the bed. His gaze lingered on the check, the note, the whole sordid tableau. "Calm down, Townsend," Conan said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Calm down," Townsend snapped. "You're taking a payoff, is that it? After all that talk about the truth, about integrity, you're just going to—" "Shut up," Conan said flatly. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to stop Townsend mid-rant. "I haven't taken a damn thing. The envelope was here when I got back." Townsend didn't look convinced. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. "And what exactly were you planning to do with it? Walk out of here, leave the case hanging, and cash that check on your way out of town?" Conan met his glare with a steady gaze. "Do I look like a man who's satisfied with that kind of trade? Look around, kid. I live in a place where the curtains are older than you. If I wanted a quick buck, I'd have taken it years ago." Townsend folded his arms, but the anger in his expression began to cool into something more like disappointment. "Then why keep it?" Conan exhaled and walked over to the bed. He picked up the check and stared at it for a moment. "You ever make a mistake so big you wonder if it's even worth trying to fix it? That's what this check represents. Not a bribe, an invitation to quit." He tore it down the middle with a sharp, deliberate motion, then tore it again until it was nothing but a handful of scraps. "There. Satisfied?" Townsend still looked skeptical, but he nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm watching you." "Good," Conan said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You might learn something." Conan's motel room was silent except for the steady scratch of his pencil against the notepad. He'd been sketching a timeline. Gallagher's movements, the whispers of game-fixing, Faltone's crew hovering at the edges. The pieces were there, but they weren't fitting neatly. Not yet. He tapped the pencil against his knee and stared at the paper as if willing it to reveal the missing link. The revelation came not in a flash, but a slow unfurling. Gallagher had been killed just as his article neared completion, an exposé on game-fixing, implicating figures at the highest levels of professional football. Falcone wasn't just protecting a gambling syndicate, he was protecting someone in the league's upper echelons, and that someone had paid him handsomely to keep things clean. Conan leaned back, his pencil stilling. The high-ranking league official, the man who had publicly denounced gambling's influence on the sport, was connected to Falcone through a web of kickbacks and off-the-record meetings. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Desperation to maintain a polished image, to protect the league's meteoric rise at any cost. Conan tossed the pencil onto the nightstand and rose. He was due at the Super Bowl pre-game gala in an hour. The event was an annual showcase of luxury and influence, a swirling mix of executives, sponsors, players and hangers-on. If the official was there, Conan would find him, and then he would get answers. The gala unfolded within the grand ballroom of a Miami beachside hotel, its vaulted ceiling adorned with chandeliers that glittered like jewels in the evening light. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided between the tables, offering champagne toasts and hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with conversation, and the faint strains of a live jazz band playing in a corner alcove. Conan slipped in unnoticed. Dressed in a borrowed suit that sat awkwardly on his broad frame, he moved through the crowd with practiced ease. No one paid him much attention, their focus drawn to the dazzling display of wealth and celebrity. He spotted his target near the bar, a tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, laughing with a group of league officials. He approached slowly, timing his steps with the crescendo of laughter. When the group's attention shifted momentarily, Conan tapped the official lightly on the shoulder. "Excuse me, Mr. Greenfield." The man turned, his genial expression freezing when he recognized Conan. "Detective, I didn't realize you'd be attending." Conan smiled thinly. "I wasn't on the guest list, but then again, I've found invitations can be overrated." Greenfield's eyes darted to his companions, who took the hint and moved away. The official's voice lowered. "If you have something to say, I suggest you say it quickly. This isn't the place for unpleasantness." "Then I'll get straight to the point," Conan said, his tone sharp. "You've been working with Falcone to fix games. Gallagher found out, and now he's dead. I'm not here for pleasantries. Greenfield, I'm here to find out why." The colour drained from Greenfield's face, but his composure held. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Conan caught a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. Two men, broad-shouldered, wearing dark suits, had entered the room. Falcone's men. Their gazes swept the crowd and landed on Conan with the precision of a hunter spotting prey. Conan cursed under his breath. "I see you brought friends." Greenfield's expression turned wary. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Conan replied, taking a deliberate step back. The men were closing in, their movements slow but deliberate. Conan glanced toward the nearest exit, a set of double doors leading out to the terrace. The crowd and the music might provide cover, but not for long. "Enjoy the party," Conan said, forcing a tight smile before pivoting away. He wove through the throng, dodging waiters and clusters of guests, his heart pounding in his chest. The men followed, their path cutting through the gala's elegance like a knife. As Conan reached the terrace doors, he pushed them open, the night air washing over him in a cool rush. Beyond the terrace lay a manicured garden, lit by soft lanterns and bordered by the dark expanse of the ocean. He didn't have time to appreciate the view. Footsteps echoed behind him. Conan dashed into the garden, his shoes crunching against the gravel. The path forked, and he chose the darker, less obvious route, ducking beneath the hanging branches of a sprawling banyan tree. The muffled sound of the gala faded, replaced by the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. It wasn't enough to lose them. Conan's mind raced, weighing his options. A trap. This had been a trap from the moment he stepped into that ballroom. But now he knew just how far Greenfield and Falcone were willing to go. He'd find his way back to the main road, back to the motel. He'd regroup, gather more evidence. The game wasn't over yet. Super Bowl Sunday dawned bright and blistering, the Florida sun already casting long, harsh shadows across the packed streets. The air was electric, charged with the anticipation of a nation's most watched spectacle. Crowds streamed toward the Orange Bowl, decked in Packers green and gold or Raiders black and silver, their laughter and chants mixing into a chaotic symphony. Arthur Conan moved among them unnoticed. Dressed in the casual attire of a fan jeans, a wrinkled button-down, a Raiders cap pulled low, he melted into the throng. In his pocket was a tattered notebook page, the unfinished article by Sam Gallagher. It was more than a journalist's final notes. It was the bait. Inside the stadium, the pre-game energy was palpable. Vendors hawked souvenirs, cameras panned over the roaring crowd, and the marching band warmed up with a brass-heavy rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Conan kept to the edges, his practiced eyes scanning the faces around him. No sign of Falcone, not yet. He slipped past a security checkpoint with practiced ease, descending into the bowels of the stadium, where concrete hallways replaced the vibrant chaos above. It was quieter here, the sound of the crowd reduced to a distant rumble. Ahead he spotted Townsend leaning casually against a support pillar, trying, and failing, to look inconspicuous. "You got it?" Townsend asked, his voice low. Conan nodded, pulling a small tape recorder from his pocket. "Ready when you are." They exchanged a brief, tense look before Conan disappeared further into the maze of hallways. It didn't take long to find the agreed-upon meeting spot, a narrow corridor beneath the west stands, dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint metallic tang of the stadium's underbelly. Moments later, Dominic Falcone arrived. He was flanked by two of his men, their sharp suits and hard eyes cutting an imposing figure. But Conan's attention was fixed on the man following them, the league official, Greenfield, his face drawn tight with a mix of irritation and unease. "Conan," Falcone greeted him, his voice smooth as ever, "I don't appreciate being summoned like this." Conan leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed. "I thought you'd want the opportunity to clear your name. Gallagher's notes paint quite a picture. Game fixing, payoffs, and a dead reporter. Seems like a good time to set the record straight." Falcone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, detective." "And you're playing a crooked one," Coney shot back. "We both know Gallagher's article would have ruined you. But you can't kill every reporter, and you can't keep the league's golden boy here clean forever." Greenfield bristled, his polished facade cracking. "You don't have a shred of proof." "Save it," Conan interrupted. "We're all adults here. You're not dumb enough to admit it outright, and I'm not dumb enough to think you will, but that doesn't mean the truth won't come out." Falcone exchanged a glance with Greenfield, who was visibly sweating now. The silence stretched thin as a knife's edge, until Falcone let out a low chuckle. "You really do have nerve, Conan." Conan smiled faintly, his hand brushing his pocket. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of watching people like you walk away clean." At that moment Townsend stepped into the corridor, holding the tape recorder aloft. The click of the stop button echoed faintly. "Got it all," he said calmly. "Every word." Falcone's men shifted, but Falcone held up a hand. His smile returned, faint and almost amused. "Nicely played, detective. I should have known you had something up your sleeve." "You should have," Conan agreed. Greenfield's face turned a shade paler, and he took a step back. "You... this is entrapment." "Not entrapment if you walk into the trap yourself," Conan said, his voice laced with dry amusement. You brought your own noose. I just held up the mirror." Falcone's calm demeanor cracked for a moment, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Instead, he straightened his tie, his expression settling into something unreadable. "I imagine we'll see each other again," Falcone said at last, his voice low. "Sooner than you think." "Not if you're behind bars," Conan replied, "though I hear they're taking reservations." Falcone's eyes narrowed briefly before he turned and walked away, his men following silently. Greenfield hesitated, his mouth opening as if to protest, but Townend stepped closer, the tape recorder still in hand. With a muttered curse, Greenfield spun on his heel and disappeared after Falcone. Conan and Townsend exchanged a glance. The stadium above them roared as the national anthem began. "You think that'll be enough to bring them down?" Townsend asked. Conan shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe not, but it's a start." They left the dim corridor, stepping back into the bustling chaos of the Orange Bowl. The game would begin soon, and the crowd's focus would turn to the field. But somewhere beneath the surface, the cracks in a much larger game were beginning to show, and Conan, for the first time in years, felt he was exactly where he needed to be. Half-time came swiftly, and the air inside the Orange Bowl was a symphony of excitement and anticipation. The band had taken the field, their gleaming brass instruments catching the bright stadium lights, while the crowd's cheers echoed like rolling thunder. On the field, formations of dancers and marching musicians moved in perfect synchronization, a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Arthur Conan stood just off stage, blending into the shadowed underbelly of the grandstand. The small tape recorder was tucked safely in the inner pocket of his trench coat, and his face was set in a mask of calm determination. The plan was risky, bordering on reckless, but timing was everything. If he waited until the game's conclusion, the powerful men involved would have time to slip away, time to cover their tracks. Now or never, he thought. Conan gave a brief nod to the announcer, a man in a sharp navy suit who normally read scripted half-time platitudes. This time, however, his script was about to change. Conan stepped forward, his hand brushing the edge of the tape recorder's play button. The announcer raised an eyebrow in surprise but adjusted his microphone without question. Conan's reputation, though battered, still held a certain weight in the right circles. As the band's final note hung in the air, the announcer's voice boomed through the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our scheduled programming, we have an important announcement." The crowd quieted, murmurs rippling through the stands. Conan could feel thousands of eyes turning toward the announcer's booth, and a heavy stillness settled over the Orange Bowl. Slowly he brought the recorder to the microphone and pressed play. The recording crackled to life. First came Falcone's voice, smooth yet unmistakably calculating. "This game's already decided. The score's locked. Gallagher knew too much. He had to go." Gasps rippled through the audience. Conan let the tape play on, the crowd hanging on every damning word. Greenfield's voice followed, his tone tense and defensive. "You are supposed to handle this quietly. We can't afford any more mistakes. If this comes out, the league is finished." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Conan scanned the VIP boxes. He saw Greenfield's face, pale, his mouth moving as if to protest. Falcone's expression, too, had hardened, his composure cracking under the scrutiny of thousands of eyes. As the tape finished, the announcer spoke once more, his voice steady despite the drama unfolding. "Thank you, Detective Conan. It's clear that justice must be served." Cheers erupted from the crowd. What had begun as confusion and disbelief transformed into a roar of approval. Conan glanced at the field, where the players had yet to notice the unfolding spectacle. Oblivious to the chaos above, they continued tossing practice balls, stretching and adjusting their helmets. Down in the stands, police officers moved swiftly. Greenfield and Falcone, still seated among the VIPs, tried to push through the crowd, but the officers intercepted them before they could get far. Shouts rose, but the handcuffs clicked on quickly. Conan caught a glimpse of Falcone glaring back at him, a flash of cold fury in his eyes, before the mob boss was led out of the stands. The game resumed. The players ran back onto the field, the officials signaled the next play, and the ball snapped with perfect precision. The crowd, still abuzz with the revelation, returned their focus to the game. Football had always been an escape, after all, a diversion from life's scandals. Conan, still standing in the shadows beneath the announcer's booth, allowed himself a faint smile. The drama might have played out in the spotlight, but the work had been done in the shadows, and that's where he thrived. The final whistle blew, and the roar of the crowd seemed to lift the entire orange bowl into the night sky. Green Bay's offense had done its job, sealing their championship and securing their place in history. Fans waved banners, hugged strangers, and spilled popcorn in their frenzy. The stadium lights burned brightly, cutting through the darkness like beacons. Arthur Conan sat in the shadow of the upper tier, his coat draped over his lap, the faint hint of a smile on his lips. The players on the field were mobbed by reporters and teammates, their triumph on full display. Conan felt no urge to join them. His work was done long before the last play. Townsend, still wearing the fresh enthusiasm of a man who had just witnessed his first major case unravel, dropped into the seat beside Conan. "Not a bad way to end it," he said, holding up a newspaper. The headlines stretched across the top. Conan solved Super Bowl scandal. Colin glanced at the paper but didn't reach for it. He nodded once, the faint smile still playing at the corner of his mouth. "Nice headline," he said dryly. Townsend chuckled. "Come on, you've earned it. I think you should frame this one." "I'm not the type to hang reminders," Conan replied, his tone more amused than bitter. He leaned back, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. The applause wasn't for him, not tonight, and that, he realized, was exactly how he preferred it. As the stands slowly emptied, Conan rose, slipping his coat on with practiced ease. Townsend stayed seated, watching him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "So what now?" the rookie asked. "Now," Conan said, glancing once more at the jubilant crowd, "I go back to work." He turned and began walking down the steps. The cheers and celebration continued, the lights of the Orange Bowl casting long shadows behind him. Conan moved steadily, his silhouette disappearing into the throng. He didn't need the headlines or the cheers. For the first time in years he felt something far better, a sense of peace.